Our first speaker today is Dr. Victor Cabrera, and he is a professor and extension specialist in dairy management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Dairy Science Department. Dr. Cabrera combines applied research, interdisciplinary approaches, and participatory methods to deliver practical, user-friendly, and scholarly decision support tools for dairy farm management. These scientific tools are aimed to improve dairy farm profitability, environmental stewardship, and long-term sustainability of the dairy farm industry. During his career, Dr. Cabrera has developed more than 40 decision support tools, published more than 70 referred articles, and 9 book chapters, presented in more than 100 scientific sessions, and given talks in more than 400 extension meetings in Wisconsin, other states, and several other countries. Dr. Cabrera has been distinguished with numerous awards throughout his career. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Cabrera as our first speaker today.
Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to discuss some of the decision support tools we have available for dairy farmers, the dairy industry, consultants, and anyone else who would like to use data with the intention to improve the performance of dairy farms. We have started this work several years ago. I have 12 years at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And throughout this time, my work and the work of my lab group, the students from master, PhD, and some undergrads as well, has been to put together information that has been requested by farmers, extension agents, and industry people to help dairy producers improve their performance in different management areas, like nutrition, replacement, health management, genetics, etc. So it is unfortunate the situation we are living today and the crisis the dairy industry is facing. And so we want this time to use the same rigorous tools in order to help dairy farmers and dairy consultants cope with the new challenge that farmers are facing right now, which is reduced milk production. We need to do this in a very safe way. The idea is, and the hope is, this is gonna pass sometime soon, and then farmers need to be prepared to take advantage when this happens. So the changes that they do in order to improve or to cope with this situation shouldn't be in detriment for a long time in the dairy farm. This is the website address, and I hope many of you are aware of it, dairymgt.info. And if you are not, I really encourage and invite you to visit this website. As I mentioned, most of the tools that have been produced here have been a response to questions and inquiries that have come directly from the stakeholders, dairy farmers, dairy industry, dairy consultants. So there is the highlight and the core, the center core of the website are the decision support tools. And as you can see here, there are several management areas in which decision support tools have been created, like feeding and nutrition, heifers, reproduction areas, genomics, production, replacement, etc. And besides that, there is, in my opinion, good information about the latest research in management that can be found in the publication areas. There are some presentations, links, and other information that's relevant to the tools that have been developed. But the highlight and the core and the center of the website are the decision support tools. So as I said as well, today, unfortunately, because of the situation, we need to cope with the problem of additional supply that are not being, it's not been, farmers are not being able to sell at the moment. And we have developed in this work group within the dairy team who are organizing this webinar, a series of fact sheet fact sheets that deal with potential ways dairy farmers can decrease the supply of milk without hurting the long term of the profitability or performance of the farm. So there are specific fact sheets about potential culling opportunities. I know this is a big decision farmers uh, may think very careful to do, but potentially we can do that if that's one option that the farmer would decide at the end. We should do in a very systematic way and using the best data we have available on the farm in order to uh, actually come back after the decision has been made and recover the dairy farm performance after certain short period of time. So we do have, for example, for that, and we're going to talk more in detail, a tool that will allow us to find out what are the best cows on the herd and the worst cows on the herd. So if there is a need to cull more aggressively some of the cows in order to reduce the milk production, uh, if that's, as I said before, the decision that needs to be made, then we should be able to find out which are the best candidate cows that should go instead of other cows. In my experience, and the data indicates that many times that decision is not being made very carefully on with all the data available. So we have a tool, and we're going to discuss in a moment, that can help us to do better decisions on that area. There is another fact sheet, and I really encourage you to actually get these fact sheets and read carefully these fact sheets. And another one deals with the early dry off. Another potential decision farmers could do in order to reduce partially the milk production is to increase the time cows spend as dry late in the lactation after the pregnancy. So here as well, the recommendation is to do this very carefully because we should not extend that dry off period too long, maybe from 50 to 70 days, for example. And if they do that, we need to know actually how much less milk we would be producing. And probably farmers, each specific farmer or farms will have the goal to reduce certain amount, certain proportion of the milk. And therefore, we have tools, and one of those that we're going to highlight today will tell us how much production we can decrease depending on the additional days that we can dry off the cows. And also will tell us, the tool, how much less income or income over feed costs we will be decreasing by doing so. Unfortunately, all these decisions will have a net return decrease. What we are trying to do here, what we should do, is try to have the least impact economically as we can. There is another fact sheet that's gonna deal or deals with changing the frequency of milking. For example, from 3x to 2x. In the past, we created a tool that actually was intended for the opposite, to help farmers decide if they would like to increase from 2x, 2 times a day milking, to 3x, 3 times a day milking. And this tool, like a partial budgeting, will tell you how much is the economic value of doing that decision. Today, unfortunately, we need to use the tool in the opposite way, actually going back from 3x to 2x, and how much is the impact in milk amount and in economic value that we will decrease by doing so. So probably the decision at the end of decreasing certain goal of milk proportion in the herd would be a combination of the several decisions. And here are three examples of tools that are available for you to use and help in these difficult times. There are also another fact sheet about, there is another fact sheet about diet modifications. We do have a section about diet and feeding in the decision support tools that could help somehow on that, but not specifically on the recommendations that have been portrayed on that fact sheet. I will talk a little bit about that at the very end as well. So going on, moving on, we have this tool that we call the economic value of a dairy cow. And in a nutshell, what it does basically gives you the relative value of every single cow in a herd, comparing all the cows at one point in time. So the user basically what is doing is comparing the future net return we expect from a cow and a potential replacement of that cow in the long term. And by comparison, we can actually find out the value of every single cow in the herd, and we can rank the animals from the worst to the best animal. In order to use this tool, the farmer or the user would need to define simple input variables in the tool, which are all portrayed here in yellow cells. And basically, the most important ones of these input variables are the cow variables. We need to define what is the situation of the cow at this point. If the cow is pregnant or not, is early lactation or late in lactation, so we can define that. And importantly, we can somehow portray the genetic value of the animal or the productivity of the animal, always in this case, in relative terms compared with the other herd mates on the farm. After doing so, another important factor is what is the expected genetic improvement that will come with a potential replacement, whether the replacement comes tomorrow or whether the replacement comes 3 or 6 months from now, the decision becomes basically the same. The point is, we want to find out relatively which are the best animals and the worst animals on the herd. We need to define a number of herd variables, like for example, the production of the whole herd or the culling rate or the reproduction rate of the whole herd. These variables are important, but not nearly as important as the other variables because these will attain to all the cows and the potential replacement at any point in time. So it will influence the cow value, but not as much as the other variables. For example, in this case, for this third lactation cow, 8 months after calving, a non-pregnant cow, her value is $64, which is a low value, but positive still. If this value becomes negative, and it will become negative at some point, it will mean in normal situation that we should replace that animal because we will be getting more net return in the long term by having a new animal on the herd. But during these hard times, maybe sometimes we will consider culling animals even if they have positive value, but as long as this positive value is relatively low compared with the other animals. So basically what I'm saying is portrayed in this slide. We will have in these dots here in the curve, all the animals on the herd. And we can calculate this cow value, value of economic value of each single animal for all the animals on the herd. And we can rank them from the lowest to the highest. We will have some negative values and we will have some positive values and we will have a very high positive values as well. In normal times, as was before, likely our best decision would be to replace those negative values. But in these times, maybe if we want to be more aggressive and the decision ends on having more aggressive replacement rate, we will need to start moving the arrow a little into the positive side, but those that have the lowest positive economic value. That way, this is a much more systematic way to do a difficult decision of calling more aggressively. I have no time to go into more details about that, but the point is with this tool, we can systematically and very rigorously have a value of every single animal on the herd, and that will help us greatly to do decisions of culling if that's needed. Next, moving on to the point of try to increase the dry off period of some animals. One key variable to do this decision is to actually portray and represent well the lactation curves on our specific herd. As you can see here, we have a tool that you can enter your own data, which are the red dots here, of production levels at different days postpartum here, for example. Let's imagine this is a second lactation uh, data or data from cows in second lactation at different days postpartum. And then the blue line would be what the tool gives you back as a function of how that milk lactation curve looks like. That's a very important first step. And we can do this for each one of the lactations because this is gonna give us a good idea how much less milk or how much less milk we will be producing by increasing the dry off period. So in the same tool, in another tab, actually you can graph a smoother curve of what should be, in general terms, a lactation curve. Again, let's think this is a second lactation curve, and then we can actually graphically see what would be the change from 330 days to 350 days milk production decrease, which is blue marked in this figure. So let's assume that we have a cow pregnant at 120 days. The, the calving likely will occur at about 400 days if there is a 280 days of gestation period. And if we assume the change from 50 to 70 days of dry period, this will be the critical 20 days that will be producing less because we are drying off these cows early on. And that actually is being portrayed here in amount of milk that will be reducing our whole production on the herd. And we can disaggregate for all the cows that we will like to do a decision like this, right? Maybe we don't want to do this on all the cows. We want to select group of animals that would be more likely to have less detrimental effects later on doing so. But the other thing I want to show you about this tool is that in the next tab of the actual tool, we can be a little fine-tuned in our decision of drying off different times. Actually, here are two scenarios, on the left and on the right. On the left, we have 50 days of dry period, and on the right, we have 70 days of dry period. And actually, since we have already defined and portray well our lactation curve in a specific lactation, we can find out here, down here, what is the difference in milk lactation and income or feed cost that will change in each of these situations. For example, we portray this in the fact sheet that deals with this area of management, that for every 10 days of more dry period, we would expect on average, this needs to be done at the farm level, obviously, but on average, we would expect about 500 pounds less milk and about a loss of $60 of income or feed costs by doing so for every 10 days of additional dry period. This will change according to farms, and here is the tool that will allow them to actually make a better decision which cows would be better off by doing so and decrease the goal of milk production that the farmers require. Here is another tool moving on to the other area of management that could help us to decrease the supply of milk. And here is, as I mentioned before, changing from 3 eggs, 3 milkings a day to 2 milkings a day. Literature points that this change, actually, as I mentioned as well, uh, between 7 and 8 pounds of milk would be the increase or decrease by doing this change. Originally, this tool was created to see the value of increasing from 2 to 3x. But we can use in reverse order. Basically, the decision is exactly the same, the value is the same, only in the opposite direction. Like for example here, changing from 3x to 2x with the conditions that you see on the left that they should be farm specifically defined, when we have a cost of feed of 0.10 per pound of milk, we will be having a loss of net return of about $51 per cow per year. And actually, that will represent uh, about uh, 1,000 pounds of milk of less production when we do so on a per cow basis. So therefore, also with this tool, it can help us to add to the goal of how much supply of milk we could decrease safely, temporarily on our farm uh, to actually handle and cope with these difficult times. We do have a section of feeding and nutrition with a number of good tools that could be also helpful in this decision. As I mentioned before, they don't relate exactly to the decisions that are portrayed in the fact sheet, but I just want to point you out to two tools that I think could be useful in these difficult times. Feedball, which actually allows producers and consultants as well to find out what are those feeds that have a better value per nutrient content. So basically it uses all the feed prices at one point in time in the market, and it will give you a list of the best feed purchases for the farm. That could be very helpful anytime, but even more at these difficult times. And the other one I want to point you out is the grouping strategies for feeding lactating dairy cattle. This tool deals with only lactating, producing milking cows. And the idea is actually to have diets more accurate to their needs. And that could be achieved somehow by grouping or by feeding different groups of animals, different animals that have different requirements. I think this could be a very important decision of thinking on the farm at these difficult times that could help at least save some money on that situation. And I believe this is my last slide, and I just want to point you once more to the fact sheets that I believe are going to be released after this webinar, and I want to point you those out and encourage you to take a look to those that I think they have very good information for this difficult time.